There are three big editing mistakes that make your photos look fake and overprocessed. And having been teaching Photoshop for over 12 years, I see them sneak into people's images all the time. So in this video, I'm going to show you what these editing mistakes are, how they negatively impact your photo's realism, and the steps to follow to avoid ever making these mistakes again. The thing is, the negative effect of these mistakes can be tricky to spot until someone points them out. Instead, they kind of just leave a photo feeling fake without you being able to put your finger on why. Now, I remember a few years ago sharing an image online which I was super proud of. It was a stunning, colourful sunrise in an amazing seascape location. I'd executed my editing workflow to perfection, or so I thought. But then I happened to be talking on a podcast with a photographer whose work I admired a lot. And he said something along the lines of, "Is that a halo around the edge of the rock?" I was absolutely mortified because I'm usually so self-critical and I hadn't picked up on it. But here's why it snuck in. After peeping every pixel in excruciating detail, I came to the conclusion that the halo was not actually a result of some dodgy layer masking, which is actually the number one way that halos happen. No, it was a natural effect of a patch of the sky being a tiny bit brighter just behind the rock, which made it look like a halo that you would get from dodgy layer masking. So to fix it, I created an adjustment that darkened the image just enough to eliminate the halo, inverted the layer mask. I loaded a luminosity selection to brush through into the mask so that I didn't brush over into the rock itself and introduce an actual masking mistake. And FYI, if you haven't got it yet, my free luminosity masking plugin makes this technique 10 times easier than the manual way, and you can download that from the link in the description and pinned comment for free. But once I had the luminosity selection, restricting the brush to the bright sky only, I carefully brushed the natural halo away. But while halos are a common editing mistake caused by inaccurate layer masks, the actual mistake this time was this: not realizing that if it looks like an editing mistake, then it may as well be. Whether they happen naturally like this, or if you mistakenly introduce them into your images, halos can instantly make a photo look fake. So to avoid them when you mask adjustments or bracketed exposures in or out of your image, you need to make sure that you're brushing perfectly up to the edges of certain objects without painting over the lines. Luminosity masking is often the most accurate way to do that, but the normal way to use that technique is very complicated. But you can remove 99% of that complication with my free Photoshop plugin. Now, even with the most accurate layer masks in the world, your photo will still look fake unless you avoid mistake number 2. It's one that catches photographers out when making selective adjustments to brighten, darken, or alter contrast in different areas of a photo, or when blending bracketed exposures for a high dynamic range result. And the end result is the kind of look and feel that you'd normally associate with bad HDR from back in the day. But the question is, how does it happen and how do you avoid it? So let's take a look at these two different edits of the same photo. One looks pretty fake. Hopefully you can agree which is which. So what's the actual difference? Well, objectively, the rock is lighter and the sky is darker in the one on the left than in the one on the right. But why does that make it look fake? It's down to one word: balance. Now, some more words. The balance between what should be light and what should be dark in the scene. Now, photographers often get this balance unbalanced when they brighten dark objects to try and see all that nice detail in the shadows. They end up making those dark things brighter than the bright things, while usually also making what should be bright darker than the dark things. So knowing that, how do you now tell what the balance should be? Or in other words, how far can you brighten a dark thing before it looks unbalancedly, is that a word? Let's go with it, unbalancedly bright. Anyway, if you've seen any of the editing walkthroughs in my online courses, you'll have seen me do this a lot. And the reason is because, for some reason that I can't explain, it's just easier to see if something looks like a bad HDR when you view it at this small thumbnail size. But if you want to be a bit more scientific, here's a quick and easy way to compare the actual brightness values. Just click on the foreground color over here with the brush tool selected, and that's going to open the color sampler. Now make sure B is checked in this little thing right here, and then click and drag the mouse around the image to see the real brightness values of the pixels that you're currently moving and wiping the mouse over. Now here, as I move between the rocks and the sky, you can see the brightness slider is jumping wildly from not very bright to very bright. But when I do the same thing in the unbalanced version, you can see the brightness values are barely changing when I hover between the sky and the rocks. So you just have to really think, would a dark rock be darker than a sunrise sky in real life? Now take the answer to that and then put it forward into this question. Would the rocks being the same brightness as the sky make the photo look more or less realistic? Here's the thing, even if you nail a perfectly accurate layer mask and maintain natural balance between light and dark things, your photos can still look weirdly flat and fake if you're making mistake number 3. Now it's one that I made for years even without realizing it was a problem, because when you capture a colorful sunrise or sunset, it's natural to want to make those colors as vibrant and saturated as possible everywhere in the frame, pump up the saturation in the sky to make it explode with color, enhance the contrast across the whole scene to make everything pop, and then lift those shadows to reveal all that interesting detail. But when you do all of these things, you end up with something that looks like this. And that's versus something done properly that looks like this. So what's actually different? Let's have a look. The problem is that we've destroyed the sense of depth in this image, because in real life, things in the distance actually look different to the same thing up close, thanks to atmospheric perspective, which is all those particles in the air between you and the far away stuff. And because of that, distant objects tend, as a general rule, to be lighter, lower contrast and less saturated. Close objects tend to be darker, higher contrast and more saturated. But when you edit everything the same regardless of distance, pumping contrast and saturation into that mountain off in the distance in the same way as you're doing to the rocks right up close to the camera, then you just flatten the whole scene. So to avoid this mistake, you need to edit things differently based on how far away they actually are. So keep your foregrounds relatively darker and more contrasty. Let your backgrounds stay lighter and a bit lower contrast. And if you want the easiest way to do that, there's actually a hidden Photoshop feature that lets you create masks based on distance rather than brightness. So watch this next video to see exactly where Adobe hid it and how to use it.